Hi everyone. NET-609 network security. Do a little review of the weeks 1, 2, 3. This is actually, we're into week 4 right now. So when we talk about security, we have to make data available. We want to secure the integrity of the data, that it hasn't changed, and we want to make the data confidential, that the right people get to see it. So keep the data accurate, figure out who can see what, but yet we have to make data available. And so we talk about data, the different states data can be in. Data can be stored. Okay, so we have to maintain those when data is stored, when data is in transit, moving from one location to another, like through a network, or while it's actually in memory being processed. Okay, so it has to be available, but yet we want to make sure it doesn't change and the right people can see it. So we talk about authentication to allow people to access the data, and then we talked about those already. We talked about hashing and encrypting, an MD5, SH12. Talk a little bit about Diffie-Hellman, and here was an example of Diffie-Hellman. And this from here. And there's a lot more information. We talk more about Diffie-Hellman when we get to VPN later on. And then here is that scenario, that's a little bit of review of information data assurance. If we want to send a message from, let's say, A to B, a couple things that we can do. First of all, to make sure that the message hasn't changed, to ensure the integrity, we can hash it, MD5 hash, and then send the hash. We send the message. When it gets to the other end, they do an MD5 hash and check it with this hash to make sure it's okay. That makes sense? Okay, so we can assure that. If we want to make sure the data is hasn't changed, or if that's confidential, we can encrypt it with a key, and then if we use a shared key, then we can send the information over and decrypt it with the shared key. Now, you have to get the shared key to both locations, which isn't always possible. So we could use a public private key pair. Okay, there's a couple different ways you could do that. And I have a number of different ways that was done here, but you can take the message. I could take the message and we could send over the public key, encrypt the message using the public key. Now I have Matt here, but it'd be the public key from B. Then send the message over, and then they can decrypt it with their private key. So the message gets over here, and then decrypt it with a private key. And then another way, you could do a signature. One way you could create a signature, you could hash it, so you got this hash. then you could encrypt it with his private key, send public key over to B, send the hash over, use the public key to decrypt it, hash the message. If the hash is matched, it must have come from A. Crazy. You can have a certificate authority manage your keys if you want to, your public and private keys. Alright, I think this is more up to date to what we've been doing in class this term. We talked about data centers, security of data centers, what state the data's in. We reviewed data, integrity, confidentiality, and available, when it's being processed, stored, and when it's being transmitted. We also talked about these layers. The access layer, I'm going to draw like a red, okay? This is where the information's coming in. Let's say either wireless to an access point or coming into a switch. Some people would consider this like untrusted area, the access layer. Inside your distributions where we move it around, and that's where we can set policy. We can use access control lists and determine what information goes where. The core layer up here, we don't want to be doing much policy. We want to just be able to move traffic. And then we gave a little example over here. The distribution layer, access layer somewhere, and then the core up here moving it around. Drivers for security, we've got the overhead here. Is there a threat? How vulnerable are you to the threat? Can you mitigate it? And how you decide if you're going to mitigate it or not is you measure your risk. You can either measure it in money, very quantify it, or you can qualify it. What's it going to do to your business if something happens? This is really important, actually. You got to measure your risk. You got to know, is there a threat? What's the chances of that threat happening? And then what do? You can mitigate it. You can try to stop it if it creates for you a high level of risk. Or you can just leave it go. Or you can transfer the risk. You can get insurance and move it. So we talked about over here, if you don't want to manage your data, you can put your data in the data center. Let them worry about backing it up and securing it. And just pay them. Talk about access. So we were referring to an edge router. A router going out to the internet, or, as you'll hear me say, some untrusted area. Okay? We got to worry about physical security, people actually getting to it. We have to take care of the iOS files and configuration files. And then we got to harden the device. Updates, if it's a switch, don't leave ports open, don't be running services you don't need, etc., etc., hardening the device. Accessing the device, we can have local access or remote access. You could be, physically at the device, or you can get to it remotely. And that can be in band or out of band. In your production network or in another means of getting to it. VTY lines, Telnet, SSHN. Enhance the login. And so then we talked about authorization, administrative roles, and the students worked on role-based command line interface. Talked about the privilege levels, 2 to 15. That can be Actually, you configure 2 to 14. You can configure those with certain commands and so forth. We mentioned strong passwords and how important they are. Simple network management protocol, network time protocol. Got to be careful with security here. This is important. You got to have the correct time stamp on events that happen in the device. And then we talk about auto secure. This is a review of some of those same items that we talked about the following day. And again, this is a review here. We talked about DMZ, the firewall, your internal network, and then your edge router. Local and remote, domain name, RSA, we're talking about setting up SSH. And then we talked about the privilege levels. And then we said role-based. You can use a root view to create views, and then you can create super views that actually, have those views. So you can set up a view with what commands and what things people can do. And you can be fairly granular here when you set this up. Again, talk about this, recording things in syslog, resilience, configuration. We talk about AAA. I have to repeat that. We use local server, Radius or TACACS server, or if you're going to local. Have a central location to keep that information, and allow those, you can merge them with Active Directory. And so the lab has you configure that. We talked about using Radius to give access via Wi-Fi. There's going to be more on 802.1x. This ability to monitor people entering at the ports. Not only access, but also posture. What things are on the device to let them in or not. Here at the access layer, you have a server. And that's it.